Hey, Stephanie. So it's just 2 o'clock. We're still letting people jump into the session, but just as a few quick words, everyone has the ability to unmute themselves, but we ask that unless you're asking a question, just to refrain from unmuting yourself, just so that we can keep the background noise to a minimum. But if there's questions, please put them in the chat. That's being saved, as well as everything is being recorded, so we can share this session with you after as well, in case you missed anything. So we're thrilled that you're all here this afternoon, and thank you. And I will leave it to Stephanie, and she can take it away.
Thanks so much, Jen. And yes, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to write in the chat box or use the raise hand option on the bottom. I will be able to take some questions throughout the presentation as well. So here we're after 2, so I will get started because I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and listening to me speak today. It is such an honor to be invited to speak to this at this event. And so my name is Stephanie Praill. I am currently working with youth who are aged 14 to 18. And so that's kind of where a lot of my discussions will be today. However, a lot of the information that I'm going to provide will be relevant to all individuals under the age of 25, will really be what some of the data and some of the statistics that I'm going to be talking about will look at. But definitely my area of expertise in the field that I'm working right now is specifically with 14 to 18-year-olds. Sorry, having a tech problem trying to switch over my slides. Okay, so first I want to start with an acknowledgement, because as a visitor, I really think that it's important to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on all of the lands that we're on today. While on my own journey of understanding, I came across this image and I really wanted to share it with you all today. Because while we meet on a virtual platform, it is so important to acknowledge all of the lands that we each call home. Today, I am present on the lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. And if you don't know whose lands that you're on, I do encourage you to take that journey of discovery to learn about the lands and the people and their true history. And I do this acknowledgement to reaffirm the commitment and responsibility in improving our relationships and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we need to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people that call this land home. And we need to continue to do work towards reconciliation of the Indigenous peoples, because it's a long-term journey specific to each person and it is constantly evolving. So I would like for everyone to please just join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can and we may, in our own way, try to move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you all so much. So in today's presentation, my goal for all of you is to help you all better understand and work with youth who are struggling with addiction. So first, I'm going to talk to you about portage, how we provide our treatments, and the youth profiles and trends that we're currently noticing in our young people. Next, I'm going to share some important warning signs to watch out for when working with adolescents. And these are going to be important signs to also share with parents. If you're working with family members or parents of young people, these are important signs to also be sharing with them, because oftentimes I have to have those conversations with parents who have concerns that their children may be struggling with substance use, but aren't really sure of what they should be watching out for. I'm also going to talk about the impact that social media has on today's teens and the struggles that they currently face as a result. Then I'm going to discuss the differences in the youth and adult brain and how that should influence how we approach our clients and their treatment. And from that understanding, I'm also going to be able to touch specifically on the therapeutic community approach that Portage uses, and why that technique is extremely, why it works extremely well with our teenage clients. And then to kind of top off the presentation, I also wanted to include some of our youth in program and their voice in this presentation. So I'm going to share with you all some of the feedback that they gave about the qualities that they really appreciate in their counselors. So I do understand that there are a lot of attendees from outside of Ontario, and Portage is offering services throughout Canada, and it has been operational since 1973. The organization offers treatment to a variety of different individuals. That includes teenagers, adults, mother and their children, a concurrent disorder program, as well as employment reintegration programming. However, in Ontario and in New Brunswick, the treatment is specifically focused on treating adolescents. I also really want to note that in Ontario, there's a big focus to ensure that services can be accessed with no additional fee to the cost to families or to clients themselves. Our programming is completely covered through Ministry of Health and through Youth Justice Services in the Central Region. And then there is also partnerships with Family and Children and Children's Aid Society throughout the province as well. So a little bit about the Ontario program specifically, because once again, that's where my area of expertise lies. We are located in Elora, Ontario, which is a beautiful rural community about half an hour north of Guelph. If you know where that is, about an hour and a half from Toronto. And we service adolescents aged 14 to 18 inclusive. And so what that inclusive piece means is that our youth can turn 19 while they're in the program, but they can't access our services once they pass that 19th birthday, and they must be past that 14th birthday in order to enter in. Our treatment program is residential, so there is a 6-month commitment in order to completely finish off our program, and then there is an 18-month aftercare that's also provided to our clients, because that continued support is so important, especially when working with people in recovery and early on in those first couple of years. Our programming is gender specific, and we do have both males and females on the same site. However, their programming is kept separate. And for individuals that identify as non-binary, as transgender, during
Stephanie, you're on mute. Everybody else needs to be on mute, but you need to be unmute.
I do. I'm so sorry. Where did I get cut off?
Just like 10 seconds ago.
Thank you so much, Liz. Oh, okay. So our gender specific programming, our males and female clients are on the same property. However, they do their programming separately. If we have clients that identify as non-binary or transgender, in the admission process, there is a large conversation that takes place, and there, for all of our clients, they have the opportunity to do a virtual tour and actually connect with a client that's currently in the program. And so when we have individuals that aren't necessarily sure which community they would feel more welcome and more safe in, we offer both virtual tours to them so that they can have all of the information in that decision-making process. If clients enter into the program in one community and are feeling one way or another, there can also be conversations about switching into the opposite program. Absolutely. And then a final note about our program, because I don't want to spend too much time specifically about there. I do have a booth here as well, so if there are more questions surrounding Portage and these details, feel free to come and visit me there. I'd be happy to spend lots of time. But the last thing that I want to touch on here is that we also have a Section 23 school right here on site, and really incredible summertime staff. We actually have the teachers here on site. So that is really, really incredible right now that we can offer that, because it definitely has been a challenge in COVID for our clients to get those credits and feel like they can be working towards those credits in this last couple of semesters. The Section 23 school is work at their own pace, so there isn't that level of competitiveness in our students. So students that might take a little bit longer or need more assistance in their studies, we can provide that because we have the small classroom of a cap of 8 people with a teacher and a school support staff for that group of 8. So really able to individualize and have youth kind of slow down, or if they're kind of whipping through that material, they can get more credits a little bit quicker than the average semester. Okay, so the portage approach works on the principles of empowerment.
And then if there's some strategies that we can use.
Thanks, Jen. Portage works on the principles of empowerment through social learning. And so what's really important to point out about our treatment approach is that all youth have to voluntarily attend treatment. And that is a very important aspect because our approach is self-help and mutual support. Teens respond really, really well to hearing advice from people their own age, and that's what we're really tapping into in our program. It also allows for peers to demonstrate positive role modeling and relationship building. The day is highly structured from the time that youth wake up to the time that they go to bed. They're doing planned activities, therapeutic groups, and this also helps youth learn how to plan and organize their day, as well as take on responsibilities and the pride that comes with hard work and success. And I really want to draw your attention to the image that's on here because this is one of my favorite activities to do with clients. And if you are working directly with clients, whether or not they are young people or middle-aged, older, whatever that might be, this is a really, really incredible exercise, especially when we're building rapport with our clients. This is a coat of arms, an example of a coat of arms that a client completes at the very beginning of their program. So this coat of arms is completed by the client to tell the other members in their community about themselves and their true self. And so in this discussion, when they're creating it, we do a lot of talking surrounding that image that people might put up as a result of substance use or even as a teenager, just to try and fit in. But it's really important to bring out those core pieces that are themselves. And so in each of these sections, they are able to answer some questions.
Need help with anything you can ask during this one. It's less important for me.
Sorry, Jeff, can you please mute your microphone, please? Oh, thank you. And so in each of these sections, the clients are able to, just reflect in on what's important to them. So in that first top core, some words that they want people to describe and to use to describe about them. The one beside it, some things that they're really good at. Middle left, some values that were instilled upon them by their family. Beside that, an image or description that they would like people to view them or that they feel really portrays who they are. Bottom left is some values or qualities that they really hold dear themselves. And then finally, some goals for their life, whether short-term, long-term. And so this is just a really wonderful activity in my mind because it really starts to allow the youth or the individual to show who they truly are, some values, some important qualities, as opposed to maybe some of those external things that they were trying to put off while in their active substance abuse. So our treatment objectives, as we're very much already aware of, addiction is not simple and it's not straightforward. And the solutions for each client's problems need to be as dynamic as they are. However, there are some common trends for all of our youth in the program that we notice in terms of what we teach and what we hope that they achieve by the end of their program. So what we commonly find is that our teenagers are lacking self-respect, hope, and self-confidence. So that is going to be a major focus of our treatment with them. Interpersonal skills and family relationships are also a foundational aspect to treatment. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our family groups that Portage offers, but for right now, it's so important that we include the interpersonal relationships, because that's what's going to be really indicative to continue change after treatment. And this objective really also aligns with the understanding that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, but actually healthy connections and those relationships. Portage also has 21 core competencies and skills that we're continuously focusing on in program that build success and essential qualities that are going to increase overall life satisfaction. This includes leadership, empathy for others, the ability to ask for help, having consistency in behaviors. All of those things are really vital, and they're also qualities that a lot of employers are looking for. So to develop these and be aware of them at a very young age is really important, because it will set up for continued success, not only in sobriety, but overall life journey. And then finally, choosing positive choices and to live that healthy and happy lifestyle continuously. Youth in the program are coached by peers and staff on decision making. They're constantly doing reflection on recent choices that they've made in program and practicing the positive decision making in safe and controlled environments. We want clients to feel emotions. We want them to make some pretty tough decisions while they're in program, because that's a part of life. And we want them to make those choices and practice making those choices while in that safe environment, because it's safe. They can fall down. They can make those wrong choices. They can really focus in on themselves and how to move forward, so that when they're in the community, they're not having to do that for the first time. So a little bit more about our family support groups. Part of the holistic approach for teenagers does include family. A lot of teenagers are still in one way or another connected, and they do rely on their family members for support. Some clients will also reintegrate back into their family homes after treatment. With that being said, we do have clients that are 18 and are seen legally as an adult, and we do have clients that are emancipated or that are in extended society care and don't necessarily have that super strong family relationship. But generally speaking, there is some type of family member that clients will look to as a supportive person or look to as a mentor. And so it is really important to provide some continued support to those individuals because they are so important to our youth. Often youth will also enter into treatment feeling like the black sheep of the family, or sometimes even are scapegoats in their own family unit. And that's also an important reason why we offer these family support groups. And they are offered virtually right now and on a weekly basis. So these groups don't include the youth, and they're not family counseling. Instead, it's a time for parents or that kind of core family member to focus on themselves. The groups are looked at their own mini therapeutic community, because individuals are able to challenge and support one another within the groups. Also, individuals who have been attending the program or the family programming for longer take on a mentoring role to those newer family members. Individuals are able to explore their feelings about their loved one entering into the program. And so for some people, at first, that could be happiness and relief that their loved one is in a safe place, is seeking treatment. And for others, it can be feelings guilt or shame or hopelessness that come accepting the fact that their loved one has been struggling with substance use at such a young age. So all of those feelings are very, very normal, and family members have the time and the support to work through those feelings. And from there, parents or family members are also able to learn some of the same strategies that we teach our youth. So how to communicate properly, how to take step backs when they're feeling highly emotional, how to regulate those emotions, and very, very important, how to engage in self-care practices. And then finally, parents are also able to learn how to set those boundaries and how to manage expectations of the youth in their home. And that really is done to support that smooth transition post-treatment. So a typical resident, I don't want to spend too much time on this slide because I'm going to come back to a lot of these details, but just really quickly to note, our typical clients entering into the program have some type of struggle with school and education. There have been disruptions within the family dynamic or defiance toward parental figures. Leaving home. So some youth have chosen to become homeless or couch surf and have actually left their family home. Delinquent or criminal activities, and a very big one, use or misuse of drug use or alcohol as a means of addressing life's challenges. And that is usually the #1 reason that we're seeing young people struggling with substance use, is because they're not quite sure how to healthfully address those life challenges. So let's talk about drugs. On this slide, I really could spend all day discussing the different drugs, the impact that they have on our young people. But what I really want to reinforce to every single one of you is that if it is a substance that can be abused, teenagers can abuse it too. And this does include IV use, intravenous needles, right? A lot of people are shocked by that idea, but absolutely teenagers use a whole whackload and an abundance of different substances. And so I'm so thankful that you guys are here listening to this talk, because there does need to be some awareness around that. So let's start with vaping. In 2018, the CDC reported that about 20% of high school seniors had used a vape within the last month. Teenagers that enter into our program, we're finding they don't necessarily believe that vaping is unhealthy. There's been a lot of advertisement toward teenagers that actually it's the cigarette that is causing the most amount of harm as opposed to the nicotine. And so a lot of youth are very, very surprised to find out that the nicotine does have negative health implications such as heart disease. And even further to that, there are so many more long-term effects of vaping that still haven't been studied. And a lot of teenagers don't necessarily clue into that because they've just been told vaping is healthier than smoking a cigarette. The World Health Organization in 2014 came across some data that said that alcohol was the leading cause of death in individuals aged 15 to 29, and that was around 9% of total fatalities. And there has been some recent studies and evidence in North America and Europe that indicate that rates of binge drinking and overall underage drinking has decreased in the last 10 years. But it is still such an important topic to discuss because oftentimes youth coming into the program with us don't consider alcohol binges problematic because it's not occurring on a daily basis. And they have that false belief that because it's not happening every single day, that it's not a problem. And that until that alcohol use escalates to a daily basis, it's not considered problematic in their eyes. In terms of cannabis, there was also a study from the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse that showed that cannabis remains the most commonly used illegal substance in Canada. And I say illegal substance because for a lot of these youth, it's not legal for them to be using. However, as many as 1 in 10 high school seniors report daily cannabis use. Daily cannabis use in about 10% of our high school seniors. When you look also at teenagers versus adults over the age of 25, you're also seeing that teenagers are about twice as likely to be using marijuana when compared to that age group. And once again, youth are not necessarily viewing marijuana as dangerous or problematic, regardless of the frequency and the amount that they're using. And a lot of that has come through the legalization of marijuana because they are seeing more people smoking, and we'll talk a little bit more about the socialization or social media and glamorization later on. But it's so important to clearly communicate when working with youth what we know about the risks about marijuana use. That number one, it's not a harmless drug. Early and frequent use can lead to dependence and psychosis in young people. It can be addictive, especially when it starts in adolescence, and that the early and frequent use of cannabis use is linked to reduced IQ, lower school performance, and that increased risk of dropping out of high school altogether. Moving on to prescription medication, because once again, I could talk forever, but I'm mindful of the time here. There is that widespread concern throughout North America for the prescription drug crisis that we're currently facing. And in young people, and what I mean by young people here is 15 to 25, they actually reported the highest rate of prescription drug misuse, more than any other group, in the National Survey on Drug Use and Health in 2014. So definitely warranted within our young people. And then finally, just about opioids, because we're also facing a crisis there. Last week, our Guelph Public Health released an advisory. They do this very often, but just last week alone, there had been 7 overdoses, 2 of which resulted in fatalities. And these accidental overdoses, as the result of substance use, they're becoming more and more frequent, and they do occur within our teens as well. In 2017, data revealed that there were over 300 opioid-related deaths that year. 22% of those deaths were individuals under the age of 29. So it's also happening with our young people. And that's why it's important to talk about all of these different substances, because they definitely do use and abuse these substances. Personality risk factors for substance use and mental health conditions. So Dr. Patricia Conrad at the University of Montreal has conducted studies to understand how personality risk profiles are linked to substance use and concurring mental health concerns. So she's used this knowledge to design, develop, and then test the Preventure program, which is a prevention program aiming to promote mental health, to delay the onset of substance use by teaching therapeutic intervention skills for young people to be able to apply cognitive behavioral skills in the management of those personality risk factors that might lead to substance misuse or further mental health concerns later on. So what we can really take away from the studies that she's done is that personality targeted approaches do work with clients, and they can be used to better understand how youth personalities influence their substance use and ongoing mental health concerns. So when we look at the charts that's on this slide, you'll see that there are 5 different personality traits, some information about their neurological development, and then the substances that they are inclined towards using, and concurring disorders that might present later on. So with our top disinhibited clients, you have your impulsivity and your sensation-seeking profiles. And so with your impulsivity clients, what you're really noticing is that you have that poor inhibition and prefrontal cortex. It's not developed yet. And then your sensation-seeking client, those are your risk takers. Those are the ones that have the high reward system. And you're going to see just a lot of risky behavior with those sensation type profiles. Those two clients are going to be more inclined to use those stimulant drugs. And you're going to see more externalizing problems with clients as well. So more conduct disorder, more ADHD, ADD, more of the behavioral type of adolescent stuff there. And then you have your inhibited on the bottom. So your hopelessness profiles and your anxiety sensitivity clients. So your hopelessness clients, those are really negative thinkers. And then those anxiety sensitivity, those are also negative thinkers, but have sensitivity to fear and threat responses. So those clients are going to be more prone towards alcohol and sedative, and be more inclined for mental health aspects. They might have more mood disorder concerns and anxiety disorder concerns. And then finally on the bottom, you have your cannabis users who are at that psychosis risk. As I talked about just a minute ago, when you're using cannabis frequently at a young age, it definitely puts you at a higher risk for substance-induced psychosis, as well as ongoing and long-term psychosis throughout the remainder of the youth's life. So here are some Portage statistics. Between April 2016 and March of 2021, there were about 480 clients that entered into Portage Ontario treatment. And this is the data that they reported at the time of admission. So when we're looking at these statistics, I also just really want to highlight and note that this is the information that you've disclosed at the time of admission. What's not going to be seen in this data set is that often in program, youth do disclose additional substance use. And in this also, youth are only reporting their drug of choice or the substance that they view as the most problematic. So this isn't going to include the recreational use, the experimentation use, or substances that they have stopped using from prior treatment. And then on top of that, I'm going to come back to some more stats that we find on the next slide, but I want to also note here that about 85% of our clients that enter into the program identify themselves as polysubstance users. So this is kind of the number one substance that they feel is the thing that they're struggling with the most. So when we look at the stats that I've provided here, you have around 71% that say cannabis, marijuana, weed, whatever you want to call it, is the thing that they are struggling with the most. But once again, like I said in the last slide, a lot of youth coming in have used weed and just don't view it as problematic because it's become so normalized. So even though it's 71%, there might be a lot of the other 30% that are still smoking cannabis on a daily basis that just don't view it as kind of the drug that has affected them or that they want to seek treatment about the most. You've got about 30% of our clients saying that cocaine is their most problematic drug. Very close in third is alcohol at 29%. Then you have about 19% of clients struggling with benzodiazepine use, and then 14% of other substances, including Xanax, Molly, and lean. Those substances have definitely skyrocketed in terms of their popularity as a result of social media use and glorification, which I'm going to talk about later on in the presentation too. And then really, really quickly to note some of the other substances, crystal meth is 13% of our clients, so not far behind the Xanax, Molly, and lean use. Ecstasy or MDMA, Molly is 6%, other amphetamine drugs 4%, other opiates 4%, and then heroin coming in with 3% of our total population. Some other statistics, and this really goes back to that other slide that I was talking about with education and some of the struggles there, because about over half of our clients coming into the program have not enrolled or are not engaging in school at all. So if clients even are attending school once in that entire semester, they get looked at as attending school. So this is 51% of our clients just have refused outright to attend any type of schooling or have dropped out altogether from their high school. 26% of our population have previous judicial records. And what that really boils down to is that they have been charged and sentenced to a crime. So this number doesn't include youth who are awaiting sentencing. It doesn't include youth who have completed diversion program or are completing diversion programs. And it also doesn't include the number of youth that have just simply avoided legal ramifications because they haven't kind of gotten caught in their activities. What I also want to point out when we're looking at these statistics, sorry, I should have mentioned it before, is that these statistics are coming from our wide variety of clients that are coming all across Ontario. So we are looking at clients that are coming from our northern communities to our southwestern communities. And so these numbers would definitely look different if we were to hone in on specific regions. And so if you're looking at these numbers and saying, that's not what I'm finding, if you're working with youth, that could be the reason, is that because it is such a large population and a large region overview, that might kind of explain some of the differences that you might notice here. And then finally, to just kind of show, finally, to just kind of show some of the addiction stats before treatment, around 90% of our clients are reporting that they're using drugs on a daily basis. 6% is specific daily opioid use. And like I said in the previous slide, around 85% of our clients are reporting polysubstance use. So these are some very important warning signs, and this is what I often share with parents. And before I really dig into them, it is also very, very important to share, if you are sharing this with clients and parents, that these are warning signs. It does not mean that absolutely hands down your child is using drugs. These are just flags that parents should be watching out for, because they definitely warrant a further conversation with their child. And so I'm also going to talk a little bit about some tips of having those discussions and how to open up that communication to also share to parents once we kind of look at some of the brain activity of youth and how that influences adolescents. So changing in friends and our social activities, adolescence is a high time of peer pressure and peer influence. And so if youth are pulling away from those positive supports that parents know about, and instead are gravitating towards youth that are struggling with delinquent activity or struggling with substance use, and we know that they're struggling with substance misuse, it is definitely a red flag for people to be having those discussions, because odds are youth are wanting to experiment if they're surrounded by individuals that are using as well. Unusual sleep patterns, eating habits, and our personal hygiene. All of these are signs that there might be something going on with mental health as well. So important to be having these discussions, as well as the importance of healthy sleeping, healthy eating. Frequent mood swings and or attitude with family members. Yes, it's normal for teenagers to be moody, and it is normal for teenagers to want to have their own independence and want to break out and want to challenge parents, which goes kind of with the next one of disrespecting authority. But if it's happening frequently or continuously, definitely worth having a conversation, because these are signs that our youth often show prior to entering treatment as well. If family members are noticing alcohol, money, or prescription medication going missing from their home, that is definitely a warning sign that there is substance misuse. When we looked at the stats of the prescription medication on a couple slides back, what I forgot to note there, and I'm going to note here, is that most of that 15 to 29-year-old population that reported the most amount of prescription drug misuse actually also said that they got that substance from a family member. So a lot of the time when these young people are using the prescription medication improperly, it's because they've obtained it from somebody in their family who was prescribed it. And so if parents are prescribed medication, there's a lot of conversation surrounding harm reduction of youth getting their hands on it. So if we know that youth are inclined toward substance use, having smaller prescription and more frequent refills, having that prescription in a safe, like a locked safe, or just kind of having it always on their person so that there isn't the ability for the young person to obtain those prescribed medications. And then just some more warning signs, frequent calls from school or work. On the last piece, we noted that about 50% of our clients were outright refusing. So definitely a sign if youth are skipping or not attending altogether, that there might be something else going on. Running into trouble with the law, pretty straightforward. If youth are getting possession charges or intoxication charges, they're definitely using. And so we need to have some conversations surrounding that behavior. Continuous lies about their whereabouts and the people that they are surrounding themselves with. So just once again, wanting to make sure that youth are being honest in that. And then finally, noticing eye drops, rolling papers, other unexplained drug paraphernalia within their belongings or within their person. Definitely worth having conversations about since we're finding these things. And then some other things to note in terms of behavior. So the promiscuous sexualized behavior, self-harm, aggression, withdrawal and isolation, anxiety or depression. These are definitely things that often concur with substance abuse. And so when we're noticing these things, we should also be having more conversations about if there has also been some substance abuse that's occurring as well. I also just really want to note promiscuous sexualized behavior because as I said in the substance use section of if adults can engage in sex work in an effort to sustain their substance abuse, the unfortunate truth is that this is also happening with our young people. And what's even further unfortunate is that a lot of youth that are involved in the human trafficking sexual behavior is that they don't actually view themselves as victims of trafficking and instead view themselves as active participants. And so there's a lot of conversations that we have with these clients and these youth to really explain that they can't consent to this behavior and really just dive deep into that. And we do really collaborate with victim services when we have these clients because it is important that youth have those connections to utilize when they have been engaged or when they have been the victim of human trafficking. And then I just also really want to note with this slide that if parents are not seeing these warning signs or haven't noticed any of these signs until it's smack in their face, that does not mean that they are a bad parent. And oftentimes I hear a lot of parent guilt and a lot of parent shame for not catching these signs earlier. A lot of these warning signs and a lot of these behaviors are normal teenage behaviors as well. And so there is such a fine line there. And so if you are working with parents whose youth are struggling with addiction, it is so important that you're having these conversations and offering the support to the parents surrounding their own experience with this, because the parental guilt and shame really does exist for them, and we want to also support them through because missing these signs is so normal as well. So how to communicate, and I'm going to come back to a lot of these things once I touch on the brain, but really what I want to pull from this slide is thinking first, acting second, and keeping an open mind. So when we're having conversations, especially with parents, about having these difficult and tricky conversations about the warning signs, First and foremost, we're wanting parents to make sure that they are not engaging in these conversations as a response to an emotional reaction or just finding things. We want them to sit, work through those feelings, and then brainstorm where they want that conversation to go, how they want to approach it, how to best approach their child, and make sure that that is going to be a safe and open environment to have that conversation. If parents are coming at it in a high emotional response, or if the environment is not safe for them, they're just going to shut down. And often teens will shut down, not even only just because of what parents are saying, but why the youth think that their parents are saying certain things. And so actively listening and coaching parents on listening to hear as opposed to listening to respond goes a long way. And I'm going to come back to some other tips, especially with communication later on, but I don't want to get too cut off from the presentation. So this also is something, I think that we have time. So these are some popular social media emojis, and if you've printed my slide, you've ruined some of them for yourself, but I just wanted to just take a moment, look at these and see how many of them you know or you can guess what they might mean.
The mushrooms are mushrooms. I know that one.
Thanks, Audrey.
The leaves are obviously cannabis.
Yeah.
8 ball is amount of cocaine or some form of substance. It's
Snowflake is cocaine, grapes is wine, 8 ball's crack, probably, cocaine crack.
So makes sense why you would think that the grapes is wine, but it's actually not. Does anybody else have a guess for the grapes?
morphine.
No.
Fentanyl.
No. So going back to our just some of the huge shift in teenage, it's actually lean or cough syrup. So that is how popular it's become. It really is. And if you don't know what lean is, it is cough syrup mixed with Sprite, mixed with some type of other like Gatorade or flavor. So those are all things that youth can readily access because none of it is illegal to them. And so that's something that a lot of youth will mix and sell themselves because it is so readily available. And I think everybody else got all of the other ones. So good job, the other one, and plug. So you're plugging. Yeah, so I just thought that that would be a really great icebreaker to social media and addiction. Now, I do also recognize that another session really talks about the tech and how tech has become so problematic. And so I don't want to go too much into detail there, but there are some things that I really want to highlight about social media and mental health and how that has an overall impact. Really important to note, the fear of missing out is huge in our teens currently. And I'm going to talk stats again in a little bit, but so many youth are so glued to that cell phone and do actually believe that if they are not actively engaged, actively posting, that they will almost seem to cease to exist. And if they're not posting, if they're not watching things, then they won't be included in things. And the idea of not being so plugged in is terrifying for so many of our clients. But when we really look at social media like TikTok and Instagram, Snapchat, one thing that is very, very clear is that filters are also very popular. And that really allows users to present this curated version of themselves and of their lives and skew the honesty of what their life actually looks like. And for some teenagers, seeing friends and family out having fun can tempt them into also making risky choices. And it can also lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. It can lead to body image, eating disorder behaviors, and really also look very similar to substance misuse in the using it as a form of distraction, using social media as a way to escape from their day-to-day problems, because the life that they've created and the life that they've kind of made other people see them as on social media is so much more, like, it brings so much more joy to them than the life that they are actually living, that they just want to live in that social media content all the time. And so here are some stats. So as some teen social media statistics indicate, nearly all of our teens are in one way or another engaged in social media. And most believe that their social media use has either neither a neutral or a positive effect on their life. They just think that it's kind of, it is what it is. But to understand the increase in technology, stats really do paint a clear picture of Gen Z. So about half of our youth are reporting that they're connected almost constantly throughout the day. They're glued to that phone. The other 44% admit that they're going on several times a day. But with that, less than a quarter of these youth are believing that social media is negative to their life. But when you start to ask specific questions, you see that most, so about half of the teens do admit that they feel overwhelmed by online drama, that they feel pressured to maintain that outward appearance, and that they do feel that pressure to receive likes. So when you just outright ask and say, hey, is it negative? A quarter of them are going to say like, okay, yeah, maybe. But when you ask those specific questions, that's when we really start to see and feel the impacts that they have. There are also a study and statistics that I want to throw at you. About 70% of youth said that they are using social media on any given day. And researchers found that compared to non-users, those who are using social media very frequently are 5 times more likely to buy cigarettes, 3 times more likely to drink alcohol, and 2 times as likely to use marijuana when compared to their counterparts. So some glamorization of substance use, and I love these charts. The chart on the left shows the number of likes by photo theme, and these are all based on 2018 statistics. So for example, when we look at the top left, average likes for party posts from our popular artists like Selena Gomez and Shawn Mendes, there's almost 1 million likes for those pictures. But when we look at other pictures that they're posting, the same people are posting just about upcoming concerts or artwork or things that just involve them. We're seeing about half of the likes altogether. So that really paints a picture of how youth are viewing the material, because they're more inclined to click on the like button if it includes partying or substance misuse than if it is a boring picture. And then the chart on the right represents the top 5 summer Billboard artists of 2018 and the percentage of Instagram photos that they have containing or pertaining to substance use and partying. And so what we can see kind of from there is that despite people believing or the misrepresentation that substance misuse really is all within the hip hop and R&B and rap music, it's across genres. And while there has been some openness lately surrounding some of the artists' struggles with mental health and with substance abuse, there also is a lot of focus from certain artists on promotion of misuse of substance use, as well as a lot of publicity surrounding their overdoses and almost glamorizing those overdoses as well. So there definitely is a danger of social media. And once again, this is just specific to Instagram. You can imagine all of the other platforms. And this also was in 2018. So these charts also I wanted to include. From this, what I'm really hoping that you guys can get is that the risk of substance abuse is never really far from public eye. And that once again, a lot of our popular influential artists are showcasing use of substances, use of drugs on social media. And while some of these numbers do appear a little bit lower in the percentages, I also want you to recognize that a lot of our teenagers and a lot of our youth are following all or most of these artists or these people. Following celebrities is very, very normal. And so youth aren't just following one or two, they're following everybody and anybody that they look up to. And so while the percentages on their own seem low, when we look at the fact that youth are constantly on their device and constantly hooked into all of these different people, you start to see that it adds up, and the content there definitely adds up onto what they're seeing. So recent studies show that 75% of teenagers on social media that see other young people smoking weed, drinking alcohol, actually encourages them to experiment themselves. Studies are also showing that pop culture and media have a negative impact on teenagers. It's estimated that more than half of high school students try illicit drugs by the time that they graduate, and 70% of them are drinking alcohol at that time as well. And of those youth that struggle with addiction at an early age, by the age of, keeping in mind that the human brain does not reach maturity until the age of 25, you can only imagine the impact that these behaviors are having on the growing young minds. And then my last point about social media and addiction actually comes from a screen grab from a collaboration that Praill did with a local company. It was called the Community Company, and they did an awareness campaign for us last year, where one of our graduates shared about his addiction and what led him down his spiral, his downward spiral. So in this quote, like he shared, social media created that false reality for him. He thought that he could live his life continuing drug use and the continued impulse behaviors because they weren't just accepted by his followers, but actually encouraged by the 400,000 people that were watching him every single day. And just to kind of support this, there was a study conducted at the University of Albany that looked at the influence that social media has on substance abuse, particularly. And the psychologist actually found that the constant and unpredictable stream of content and media and validation that was established by these habitual behaviors actually increase the vulnerability to the different forms of addiction. So just like family history, mental health, lifestyle, environment are all big risk factors to substance misuse, disordered social media is just as much a risk factor to our young people for their having substance abuse problems later on in life. So our brain. So On this slide, what I want you to pay attention to is those MRIs. So like you can see in the 5-year-old brain, there's a lot of yellow, a lot of red, which shows that there's a lot of less mature activity in the brain. And then when you get over to the 20-year-old brain, while there is a lot of purple and blue that represents that it is developed, there is still that yellow and light blue towards the prefrontal cortex, or the front of the brain. And so what I really just want to point out with this slide, because I'm going to come back to it in the next one, is that you start to see the growth and the maturity in the brain in the back of the brain first, and then the last to develop is that frontal cortex. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So the limbic system is the group of structures located deep within the cerebellum. So it's about your ear and in. It's composed of the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. And those regions are involved in emotions, motivation, and all of that is related to survival. So the emotions are your fear, your anger, your fight or flight response. And it's also involved in your feelings of pleasures and your rewards related once again to survival. So often your eating and your sex, those types of pleasures are controlled in your limbic system. It also regulates the memory storage and retrieval of events with a strong emotional response. And then your prefrontal cortex is just kind of behind the forehead. It is involved in exercising good judgment when presented with difficult life situations. So it's responsible for the cognitive analysis, abstract thought, moderation of correct behavior in social situations, and it also acquires information from all of your other senses, orchestrates thoughts and actions in order to achieve specific goals. So like we saw in the last slide, MRI studies show that the development of a human brain tend to occur from the back to the front. And so that explains that your prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of all of those executive decision-making abilities, is actually the last to mature. And those studies and that MRI also shows that myelin, or your white matter, is less in your teenage brain, and it actually develops throughout adolescence. So with more myelin or white matter comes more better flow of information between your brain regions. So this is the explanation of the maturation gap. And that's really what is happening in your adolescent mind. So you've got this limbic region that is very, very focused on risk-taking and novelty-seeking, making all of your decisions because your prefrontal cortex doesn't have the ability to control and process because it's not as strong as your limbic system. And so you really do see youth weighing positive experiences more heavily and negative experiences less than adults. And there's also a behavioral bias that can lead to the risky activities like reckless driving, like unprotected sex, and yes, like substance abuse. So that really kind of breaks down why you see the less mature actions and risk-taking from our adolescent clients who on the surface might seem mature and might in Ontario, in Canada, an 18-year-old is seen as an adult. But really until you get to 25, you don't have your brain fully developed, and you do still see this maturation gap and the evidence of this gap in your brain's development occurring. And so I also, while I wanted to take a moment to show this chart and this diagram because this website is really, really interesting for individuals that might be more interested to learn the negative impacts that substance abuse has on development and on the body, the brain, whatever, this is a really cool and interactive graph. So if you visit the website that's below, and once again, I provided all of these slide notes, so you should be able to access this website on your own time. But you can actually go through and learn from each of these different classifications what the popular substances are and how they impact development and how they impact an individual. But I also really, at the end of kind of talking about youth and the brain and all of that, I want to go back to how do we take this knowledge and actually share it in such a way that it can be used. And so that kind of goes back to the conversations and the way in which we approach youth in our own treatment and how parents are going and having conversations. So first and foremost, so important that we're having thoughtful communications with our youth. So the adolescent brain is still under construction, and youth are wanting to take risks. And parents want to understand that risk-taking behavior, and it helps them to know that that risk-taking behavior is actually a biological result. And using that information, parents can tend to be a little bit more tolerant to the behaviors that we often see in adolescents. So rather than emotionally or overreacting to situations where behavior is less than ideal, parents with this information can sometimes translate that to instead having those thoughtful conversations. And having discussions about youth behavior and encouraging self-reflection. And in that self-reflection, how the situation was handled and how it could be handled in the future. So a common example that I give is if a youth chooses to go and be a passenger in a car of one of their friends who has been drinking. And we all know that it is highly, highly risky, highly, highly unsafe, but unfortunately is a very common thing that our adolescents will choose to do. And so rather than a parent coming in and saying, you shouldn't do that, you know that it's bad, instead trying to open up a conversation to explain how upset they are or what they're feeling, but then go on to talk about thinking through those decisions more carefully, especially when there are in which peers they surround themselves with, and how to avoid those possibly life-threatening situations in the future. So once again, all about having those thoughtful communications, because as a teenager, you can process and you can have those in-depth and thoughtful communications. It's just that sometimes that decision-making isn't as strong. And so allowing youth to reflect and do that reflection is very, very important for future decision-making abilities. Also, understanding the power of peer influence. So peers have a super strong influence on adolescents, including their decision-making. This includes the initiation or continued drug use, as well as use of different types of drugs. Adolescents are likely to seek out risky behaviors, especially when they're in the presence of their peers. And this is despite knowing that their parents would disapprove of those behaviors as well. So for parents, rather than having them resign to the notion that they're not as important or they don't matter as much as the youth peers, instead they should be using that to their advantage. And actually, like, one of the big things that I encourage parents to do is seek out the other parents in that peer network and trying to set a common set of rules within that peer dynamic. So having the same curfew across the board, getting on the same page about underage drinking, parties, unsupervised parties, right? Having the conversations between the adults so that all of the peer group shares the same set of rules, and there's less inability to manipulate or kind of move between the parents is definitely important for our young people. And sorry, to go back maybe to the thoughtful communication piece, part of that should also include science-based messages. And there is so much science justification out there for adolescents and the impacts that substance use has on adolescents. And so definitely using these statistics and using this knowledge to their advantage, as opposed to just saying, well, I'm the parent and that's why, right? Having that authoritative, demanding compliance, that's not going to result well with our teenagers. And so making sure that what they're saying is actually backed up by science, and that there is justification and showing that there's a reason that parents are saying the things that they are, is very important to the teenage mind. And then finally, one last thing for working with parents, or some of the things that you can share with them, is modeling responsible use. So if parents are choosing to drink alcohol in particular, they have an influence on their child's life. And so their own patterns of use definitely influences how teenagers feel about substances and about use. So if parents are drinking alcohol, making sure that they're modeling light to moderate patterns, that they're not driving under the influence, that they're not encouraging that underage drinking or other substance use, right? And encouraging marijuana use has become very popular, and actually providing the substance to youth is something that we see as well. And so explaining how that also has an impact on teenagers is definitely important. And so when we see parents that are modeling the responsible use, it does lessen the likelihood that the adolescent will develop a substance use problem later in life. So once again, those are just some thoughtful discussions to have with parents if that's kind of your typical profile of clients that you're working with, some information to maybe pass along to them to engage in those thoughtful communications with their teenager. And with all of that, we can kind of take a step back to the therapeutic community approach that Portage takes, because like I've shared again and again and again, peers have a huge influence on youth. And so the therapeutic community approach really works when we're working with teenagers, because they're able to actually hear a lot of the information from people their own age. And we are using the group, the community, as the therapy. And we're able to really say, well, don't take it from me as an old person over here. Billy Bob over there went through this, and they really faced a lot of the same stuff that you're going through right now. But look at Billy Bob over there, who is actually role modeling all of these different competencies, has really worked through a lot of these struggles, and is standing right there. And so in this therapeutic community, we're able to help residents shape their own values. We're able to also allow them to develop that realistic perception of their life, as well as building that self-respect, self-confidence, self-esteem. These are all very, very popular things that are discussed and spoken about within the therapy that happens on a day-to-day basis. And the great thing about a therapeutic community is that it's not just happening during formal therapy time, it's happening all day, every day, because people are role modeling and they are engaging in a wide variety of activities that are sober. And so by doing that, youth really start to normalize the sober side of life and making those positive decisions, as opposed to surrounding themselves with peers that are using substances. So their norms actually move from risky behavior to more healthy decision-making ability, and just that interaction between peers and more of a positive role modeling ability, we find really, really works and is very effective with our teenage clients. And then just a little bit more final points about our TC approach is that we really are able to take on a holistic approach. So like I said before, we're not just talking about the substance abuse. We're talking about the person, the things that surround it, the reasons that they started using substances, and really trying to hone in on a whole whackload of different aspects so that we can treat the whole person. We're also really focusing on the smooth transition. So referral to discharge, we're trying to make things as smooth as possible so that the youth doesn't feel like they have to retell their story again and again and again, because if you've done any type of trauma-informed counseling, you know that retelling that story can in and of itself re-trigger those traumas and be very, very harmful to the client. So we want to make sure that we are supporting them through that, and that they feel like while they're understood, they don't feel that they need to retell over and over and over. And then finally, we're really encouraging community support when they come into the program. So if you are working with trauma counselors or are working with therapists, we are really encouraging for those people to tag along, because once they leave our 6-month program, they're going back into the community. So we want to make sure that those relationships that they've developed are still in place for when they leave our program. And then our final takeaways. So these are actual things that our clients in program wanted me to share with you guys if you are working with teenagers about what they liked about their counselors. So across the board, they really, really appreciate when adults are able to understand on a personal level some of the struggles that they're going through. And really what that boils down to is having that empathy and using a non-judgmental approach. Some of our youth really, really liked those advice givers who have a ton of wisdom, a ton of knowledge, a ton of experience. Those who lead by example are also very important for our clients. So having integrity was something that a lot of them said was important. Having resources up your sleeve. So if you're not able to do something within the confines of your organization, knowing another organization or another person who can offer those services, and not just saying, oh, I don't know. So making sure that you have just a whole pile of resources for any type of situation. Using humor, a lot of our youth enjoys being patient, and then being available. So with this one, it was very, very important. It was a make or break for a lot of our clients, whether or not you were available to take those impromptu calls or those 5-minute chats, just kind of here and there. Having to call and schedule and wait a week out before talking about things was really difficult for a lot of our youth, and they felt uncared for by their counselors that were so busy that they could not take 5 minutes to answer calls or call them back at the end of the day, just to do those little check-ins. Even if you're not a crisis and they understand that you're not a crisis, it still is important to follow up, just to have those mini check-ins if they're calling and reaching out to you, that ability to reach back out. And then finally, doing activities with them. So a lot of our youth appreciate not just sitting and having that, like in counseling, sitting in one chair across, maybe going out for a walk, doing therapy while playing basketball, or doing something active, or something that's not simply just sitting there. For a lot of our youth, that was something that really had an impact on if they engaged and if they went back for services. And then a lot of people obviously enjoy when counselors go the extra mile. So offering to bring them some Hortons, or for some counselors, they were able to actually offer to drive them home or get them to kind of where they needed to be. And that was something that meant a lot for one client in particular. And then obviously that conversation led to, okay, well, what are some of the things that you did not connect with or that you really didn't like with counselors? And hands down, acting better than, or acting like you know everything, being pushy or arrogant. Those were the #1 qualities of youth being like, no, I would never go back to somebody who acted like they were so much better than me. Counselors that are too by the book or too rigid, they found them unrelatable. And what that kind of goes back to somebody wanting somebody who has the experience or who can empathize with them. They don't want somebody that they feel has never done anything outside of a textbook. They really want somebody that they can relate to. When they feel like they're being lied to by their counselors, if their counselors are using sarcasm often or have negative views about them, those types of judgments are always a flag for our clients to not go back. A lot of our teens in program also have a lot of difficulty with hypotheticals. And so working in hypotheticals, while some people might appreciate, our teenagers typically don't, because a lot of it does go over their head. So for most of our teens that are in program right now, they would much prefer a direct approach and just kind of come out and say it. Don't beat around the bush. Tell me what I need to hear and stop talking in hypotheticals. And then finally, jumping to conclusions. So either meant knowing or thinking that you know what the youth is going to say, which kind of goes back to acting better then, or hearing something from a parent or somebody outside of that person and expecting or saying that you don't need to hear their side and you know what happened because you heard it from somebody else. Those are huge things that just destroy the trust in and the relationships with our teenage clients. Okay, so there is around 10 minutes, sorry that it went on so much longer than I thought, but I do see that there's a bunch of chats, but I haven't been following along. So if there are any pressing questions that somebody would like to ask, please feel free to do that.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the calling of getting on the phone, and I fear this moment where they'll say, "I just used," and that's not a five. I'm not being heard, I guess.
Sorry, Jeff, you're kind of going in and out. If you wouldn't mind repeating or writing it in the chat box, I'm going to open that up too.
See, I put it in the chat. Should I try again?
Yes, please. Sorry, I can't
Okay,
find
I
it.
put it in the chat. Yeah, I was just saying that 5-minute conversation often isn't a 5-minute conversation, especially when they call and they say, "I just used."
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about what to do when it's not, that?
So for myself, I make sure that I always have crisis lines lined up. And so if it is a call of I just used and I need somebody to talk to me about this crisis, you can explain, "Hey man, I was just calling you back for," like you said, call back, a quick call. I'm calling that, and depending on where they're at, saying, "Hey, remember that crisis line? This is a great time for you to try and use that." That might be one way to respond to that. Or really at the beginning of the call saying, "Hi, I'm just calling. I've got 5 minutes," and putting that boundary down so that if it does look like it's going to extend the 5 minutes, being able to explain, "I'm really sorry, it sounds like you need a lot of time. However, I only have 5 minutes and I want to make sure that you're accurately supported." And so once again, referring back to that crisis line, or if you know that they have other supports in place too, that is more available to take those impromptu calls or is more available, being able to direct to those people as well.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a great question, Jeff. I do appreciate those. Are there any other questions?
Right.
Okay, so if there aren't questions, what I'll do then is I will let you all leave about 10 minutes early, take some time for that self-care. And if you do have questions that are more specific surrounding the program or even about this presentation and you're wanting to connect later, once again, I have an exhibit booth, so feel free to reach out to me. We can video chat. I also mentioned earlier too, as part of the intake and referral process, we offer virtual tours to our clients that are interested in the program. If you're somebody that's working with teenagers often and you're wanting to get that firsthand experience so that you can explain the program and can talk more knowledgeably and firsthand experience about the program, you can also reach out to me to arrange to sit with one of our clients virtually and go through that same experience and get all of this information from them. They really love doing it. And so I highly encourage, if you are working with youth, to take that opportunity as well. Okay, so thank you everybody so much for coming and paying attention and listening in.
Thanks, everyone. We'll make sure that these sessions are all shared with you.